A Chinese lab just released an AI model that scores higher than GPT-5.5 on real coding tasks, and you can download the entire thing for free. Not rent it, not call an API and pay per token. Download it, weights and all, and run it however you want. The model is called GLM 5.2, and the gap it just closed is the one Silicon Valley swore would protect its lead for years. Here is the part that should make you sit up. On a benchmark called swe-bench Pro, which throws real software engineering problems at a model and checks whether the code actually works, AP's GLM 5.2 reportedly scored 62.1, GPT 5.5 scored 58.6. On another long-horizon coding metric called Frontier SWE, GLM 5.2 hit 74.4% against GPT 5.5's 72.6. And multiple outlets report it, does all of this at roughly 1/6 the cost per token. So the obvious question is, how does a downloadable model from Zhipu AI suddenly trade blows with a top American frontier lab? And what does open weights actually mean for the people building real software? Stick with me, because by the end of this you will understand exactly what changed, why it matters, and where this whole race is heading. Let's start with what GLM 5.2 actually is, in plain language. It comes from Zhipu AI, also known as Z.AI, and it landed in the middle of June 2020. Around the 16th and 17th, the company published the full model weights on two platforms, Hugging Face and Model Scope, under an MIT license. Hold on to that detail, because the license is half the story. When people say open weights, here is what they mean. Most of the AI you have used, like the big names from the major American labs, lives behind an API. You send your text to their servers, their model thinks about it on their hardware, and they send an answer back. You never touch the model itself. You are renting access, and they can change the price, change the rules, or cut you off whenever they like. Open weights flips that. The weights are the actual numbers, billions of them, that make up the model's brain after training. When a lab publishes those weights, you can download the brain itself. You can run it on your own machines, study how it works, fine, tune it for your specific job, and you never have to send your private data to someone else's server. The MIT license on GLM 5.2 goes even further. MIT is about as permissive as software licenses get. It basically says, use this commercially, modify it, build a product on top of it, we are not going to stop you. For a company worried about data privacy or vendor lock-in, that combination is enormous. Now, let me address the thing you are probably thinking. If it is free and open, it must be small and weak, right? That is exactly the assumption this release breaks. GLM 5.2 is a mixture of -play. Experts model with roughly 744 billion total parameters. And here is the clever part that makes it practical. A mixture of experts design, or MOE, is one of the most important ideas in modern AI, so let me make it concrete. Imagine a hospital with hundreds of specialist doctors. When a patient walks in with a broken arm, you do not wake up all hundreds of doctors. You call the orthopedist. A dense model is the opposite. It is like forcing every single doctor in the building to weigh in on every single patient, which is slow and wildly expensive. A mixture of experts model is smart triage. It has a router at the front that looks at each piece of input and decides which handful of bricks are experts inside the network are relevant, and only those wake up. So GLM 5.2 has that giant 744 billion parameter pool of knowledge. Righty. But for any given token, it only activates about 40 billion parameters. You get the breadth of a massive model with the running cost of a much smaller one. That is a huge part of why these models can be both powerful and cheap to run. And there is one more spec that matters for real work. The context window was expanded to 1 million tokens. Context is the model's short-term memory, how much it can hold in mind at once. 1 million tokens is roughly enough to load an entire large codebase, every file, every dependency, and have the model reason across all of it at the same time. For a developer chasing a bug that spans 40 files per man, that is the difference between a toy and a tool. So let's go back to those benchmark numbers, because this is where the open weight story gets genuinely surprising. On the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index in version 4.1, GLM 5.2 scored 51. That put it ahead of other strong open models in the same wave, including Minimax Mwerk3 Cirque, DeepSeek V4 Pro, and Kimikite 2.6. So this is not just beating one American model on one test. It is leading a pack of capable open competitors and reaching up into frontier territory. Now here is the original take I want you to walk away with, because almost every headline gets this wrong. The story is not China beat America at AI. The real story is that the frontier itself is becoming a commodity, and it is happening on the coding tasks first. Think about why coding. Specifically, coding is the one domain where you can grade an AI objectively. The code either compiles and passes the tests, or it does not. There is no fuzzy judgment call. That makes coding the perfect proving ground, and it means the labs that crack it can prove their progress in a way nobody can argue with. So when an open downloadable model matches a closed frontier model on coding, that is the clearest possible signal that the moat is draining. The expensive, secret, rented frontier is turning into something you can grab for free and run in your basement. Let me make the cost point real, because 1/6 the cost is easy to skim past. Say you are a small startup, running an AI coding assistant for your team, burning through millions of tokens a day. If a closed model costs you, for round numbers, $6 for a chunk of work, an open model at 1/6, the cost runs you $1 for comparable quality. Over a year, that is not a rounding error. That is the difference between a feature you can afford to ship and one you have to kill. And because the weights are open, you are not even locked into a vendor's pricing. You can run it yourself and pay only for raw compute. Now, a few honest cautions, because this is where people get burned. First, benchmarks are not the real world. A model that wins on swe-bench Pro can still trip over your specific, messy, legacy codebase. Treat these scores as a strong signal, not a guarantee. Second, free to download is not free to run. Those 744 billion parameters need serious hardware to host. The little laptop on your desk is not running this at full strength. The savings are real for teams with infrastructure, but less so for a hobbyist on a single old graphics card. And third, open weights does not mean fully open. You get the weights and the freedom to use them, but you typically do not get the training data or the full recipe. So you can use the brain, but you cannot perfectly rebuild it from scratch. Here is a simple way to think about whether this matters to you. If you write software or your company pays for AI coding tools, GPT-5.5 is a sign that your costs are about to face real downward pressure, and that you have a private self-hosted option you did not have a year ago. If you are just watching the AI race, the takeaway is this: the gap between the most expensive closed models and the best free open ones, at least on the coding tasks we can measure, is now thin enough to step over. GPT-5.2 reportedly matching or beating GPT-5.5 on several long-horizon coding benchmarks, at roughly 1/6 the cost, is the proof, and that loops us right back to where we started. I told you a free model just outscored GPT-5.5 on real coding tasks, and that the gap Silicon Valley swore would protect its lead had quietly closed. Now you know exactly how. A clever mixture of experts design that activates only a sliver of its giant brain, a 1 million token memory that can hold a whole codebase, and a permissive MIT license that hands the keys to anyone. The frontier is no longer a locked vault. On the tasks we can actually grade, it is becoming a public utility. If this reframed how you see the AI race, you will want to see what happens when these open models start eating into the closed labs business model. So check out our breakdown of Minimax M3, the other open weight model making frontier labs nervous right now. Stay curious. This is AI Unpacked.